Stop! Sure you want the rest of it?
Dirty Harry Minute. Dirty Harry Minute. Dirty Harry Minute Podcast. Dirty Harry Minute Podcast.
Every penny's worth.
Welcome back to Dirty Harry Minute, the only podcast in the world to review every minute of that 1971 Warner Brothers classic starring Andy Robinson. I'm one of your hosts, John. Apologies for normal co-hosts Tim and Trent not present, but we have recurring guests, Shane.
Hello.
How are you, Shane?
I'm well, thanks.
And you've brought another recurring guest named...
Mandy. Hi, everyone.
Thanks for coming, Mandy.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, listeners will know Mandy has still not seen the movie in its entirety. Is that correct?
That is incorrect. I have actually now since watched the movie. Actually, yesterday.
Wow.
So it's very current.
Did you like it?
I did like it.
Oh, it would have been real awkward if you're like, this is the worst. I hated it. Every minute was the worst.
Yeah, I did find myself breaking it down, going, well, that doesn't make any sense. But then Shane did remind me that it was made a long time ago and I should calm down with that.
I heard there's a podcast that will review every succinct minute. So if you need like something cleared up.
Interesting, yeah.
Well, what's your take on it, Mandy? You've just seen it recently. What's the real reason of the many that they call him Dirty Harry? What's your preferred? Is he just
Great
is he a
question.
peeping Tom? Is he breaking the law? Is he a smelly man?
Is he a smelly man? I'm not sure, to be honest.
As we approach the end, mine is more he just hates everyone, like the racial epithets we get at the start. He's like Noel Gallagher. He just hates everyone.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, thank you for joining us, Mandy. We have another returning guest.
Jordan. Hey, guys.
How you going?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Matt. It's good to be back. It's, it's been a long time since I watched the film now because I watched it when we did the last podcast. I haven't seen it since. So this will be interesting to remember all the things that have happened between the last minute and this minute.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Jordan. And we are very, very delighted to have a guest stateside, one part of the Minutes of the Eight podcast. We have Todd. Welcome, Todd.
Well, thank you, guys. I'm glad to be here.
Are you a big Dirty Harry fan?
You know, the crazy thing is that no, I'm not. My dad is a psychologist, and so he always told me the evils of movies where people run around with guns in their hands saying, you know, do you want to know how many bullets are left? But I went to film school here in America, and eventually I kind of was forced to watch it. And at that point, I went, hey, it's a really well-made movie. So I guess I kind of have a weird relationship with it.
Well, Jordan, what did you think of this? Oh, sorry. This is minute 94. The minute begins with Scorpio climbing some stairs with Harry in keen pursuit and ends with Scorpio fleeing up yet another set of stairs. What did you think of this minute, Jordan?
I actually think this minute's maybe one of the weaker minutes in the action sequences in this film, just because Dirty Harry makes some really dumb decisions. At one point, he hops on just like a railway of coal, which is moving far slower than the Scorpio killer is able to limp. So maybe not the fastest way to move through that. Like there. So in the minute, he hops on that, and it's clearly moving a lot slower than he could just walk and or run. And it makes him much easier to shoot. So
I thought that too. It makes him much easier to shoot because he's going at a constant speed.
look how slow he's moving.
Grandpa speed.
And how long it takes him to get off. It's just such a weird decision to make. Why not just sprint it and catch up to him?
It kind of looked the cinematographic. It looked nice, but that was not a practical decision.
No.
What do you think of this action, in quotes, action scene, Todd? I mean, it'd be quite different if it was filmed today.
Well, what's funny for me is that I kind of find myself envious of this action because so much of what we've done with Minute of the Apes here lately, you know, the first film has so much great action, and then frankly, the second film in the Apes saga sucks, just flat out sucks. And even though jumping in, and I kind of purposely thought I've seen this movie before, I'm not going to watch a lot of it before, I'm going to jump in just on a minute. It's shot beautifully. I mean, interesting angles, stuff going on, even though I don't quite understand riding the conveyor belt, that whole thing in that minute, that really confuses me how that served Harry at all.
Yeah, I remember commenting and thinking to myself that's a great location for this kind of chase sequence because you got narrow little areas, and I felt like I knew the layout enough that I wasn't confused where they're running, but they could have been running back and forwards up the same stairs for all I knew. So yeah, it was well shot and well put together. It's just an interesting spot to have a shootout.
I guess the point is, though, is he's in a building going upstairs, and the building doesn't go anywhere or lead to anything. So why wouldn't you just wait for a bit for him to come back down? Or just an anonymous tip? Like, you don't need to chase him up the stairs into this building. Like, just wait for him. Like, also, the dude's limping. Well, I mean, his limping doesn't make a lot of sense, but surely you could just shoot him, like, slowly traveling up the stairs instead of sprinting after him. Just shoot him from slightly further away.
His limping makes sense, doesn't it? He's had a knife to the leg, yeah?
It makes sense that he's limping, but he puts more weight on the
bad leg.
Yeah, like he does 3 steps and then a hop.
Well, maybe that's like he's been favouring the other leg so long that now he's got a cramp in his good leg.
You can't actually tell which leg is meant to be sore.
He's kind of dancing in that sequence. It's like singing in the rain.
Now, Todd, one of the things I love about Minutes of the Ape is you guys really delve into shot construction and the meaning behind certain shots and points of views. That's a level of intelligence that we don't usually meet on this podcast. But do you think there's any reason why does Scorpio have a dirty bum? Why are his pants dirty? And Harry's actually fallen into a grain of corn or sandstone or something, and Harry's relatively unmarked. Is there a reason why they've given Scorpio a dirty bottom?
You know, that's funny. I as you said that, I thought, oh God, now we got to go look, and sure enough, the guy has a dirty ass. You go back and this is where I end up being the guy on Men of the Apes that does this simply because, again, I studied this, but the 70s filmmaking in America was all about that deconstruction of every element of it. And I would almost guarantee you at this time somebody went along and said, we have to make them dirty, because if you look at American cinema before this, you didn't make anybody dirty. Even the heroes would come up with a gun. Yeah. The villains would come up with a gun in their hand out of the dirt and not have a bit on them. I wish there was something funny I could put to that other than the fact that the guy does have a curiously dirty bum.
Does it help us as the audience to work out when we see someone running away from screen who we're seeing? Are we seeing dirty back guy or clean back guy?
No, I was just going to ask curiously that, because eventually when Harry gets off the conveyor belt, he's got dirty crotch guy. And so is there anything to the dirty bum versus the dirty crotch?
Oh, that would have been a good title for the film.
It's just another reason they call him
Yes.
Dirty Harry, yeah.
For that one scene just there where Scorpio leaves that section, does he have a dirty butt? No, I know we're getting stuck on the dirty butt thing. But if you rewind just a couple of seconds, I don't think his jeans were as dirty when he left, which doesn't make sense. Maybe a continuity error right there. Continuity error.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well spotted.
Nailed it.
Spotted.
Get straight onto IMDb.
Oh, I'm on it right now.
Well, Mandy, what do you think of Harry's 3-piece brown suit? It's a lot of guests, we love the earlier, like the red jumper.
Red sweater.
We love the red sweater. But I just think there's too much business. There's too much. Do you like this suit?
I mean, from a purely fashion perspective, I think a brown suit's always a really good choice.
Really?
Yeah, I do actually.
Oh.
Yeah, I like a brown suit. I'm a 70s gal. I like all of the brown warm shades. Give me all the oranges and the browns and, all that stuff. I mean, I think it's I'm trying to remember where he was prior to this point. Like, was he at the mayor's office?
Yeah, the day started off there.
Yeah, so was he looking a bit spruce for that situation? And here he is again, Dirty Harry, in a dirty moment, even though he's wearing his nice brown suit.
He seems always to start the day well dressed, doesn't he? Mm. He doesn't dress in his tracky dacks.
I think today he was just like, you know what, today I'm going to be on a coal mill, so I'll wear something dark.
Yeah.
If we just go back to the start of the minute, just one of my quotes, it says, Siegel had a good sense of visual storytelling, and his use of the lurching verticality of San Francisco as a sniper's dream terrain are still very effective. Do you agree with that, Todd?
I think that's a little over analytical for it, but yeah, the thing about Siegel made some great films. Siegel was a great director, and I'm not the biggest fan of this film, but there's no arguing as far as what he's done visually and what it tells. The shots through the stairs instead of simply a generic shot that would make a television going up from behind it. He's pretty imaginative, at least with his camera work.
I agree. I think this may have been a good opportunity to contrast the start of the film where he's sniping the girl in the crochet swimsuit, and here it's like a repeat, but the victim's getting the victim is getting some revenge, and I don't know. I would have liked to have seen a shot like that.
One visual motif that I found very interesting is if you look at the shots of Scorpio is continuously hidden behind wooden elements, where Harry's almost continuously running into open areas of wooden elements. And just to create that confusion of the villain being separated from our hero being vulnerable in the open, that's where, to me, Siegel is at least a director of that era that understood that he has to give a visual motif to his villain that's different than his hero.
Wow.
Does it remind you of a Western? Because you got a lot of wood and you've got bullets ricocheting off the wood and this kind of thing.
Yeah, you can certainly view it that way. We've got another quote here, guys, about Harry's suit. It goes, "Unlike some of the homicide inspectors who could easily have been mistaken for Montgomery Street stockbrokers, Harry looked like just what he was, an overworked cop in a cheap suit." Does it look cheap to you, Mandy?
Bit of a dig for no reason at Dirty Harry's.
Wow.
Clint Eastwood, who just brought his own suit to set, is just like, oh man, what's wrong with my suit?
Right? I really like the tie. It doesn't seem like that much of a cheap suit. I mean, I don't think it reeks of money, but then he's a cop, right? It's not like he's, unless he's the bag man for bad guys, I don't think he's...
I really like the vest.
I think you can definitely overanalyze.
That's what we're here to do.
Oh yeah, no, I'm aware of that.
Can't.
I remember watching the old westerns that Clint Eastwood did, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, A Few Dollars More and a Fistful of Dollars. I think that trilogy was called, and I remember being like really into it and wondering how they decided on the wardrobe and all of those things. And then later I found out that half of that costume is something that Clint Eastwood bought at an airport.
On the way.
The day.
Yeah.
So you were like, I wonder how long it took for them to decide which shade of brown. It's like, Clint Eastwood probably just went, here's a suit store at a Salvo's. And went, that'll do.
I'm a tall man. This is the only one that fits
This
me.
is the only
Away we
suit.
go.
It's like that ill-fitting suit. And he's like, this is the only suit that fits.
Now, Todd,
Yes.
in Dallas, in winter, does it ever get cold enough that some of your policemen would wear, or your inspectors, plainclothes policemen would wear three-piece suits, or are your winters pretty warm?
Dallas is pretty much Texas is a warm area. We're actually having a cold snap a little bit right now. I got down into the 30s last night, but you're not ever going to see a cop around here wearing a three-piece suit. They're always going to be in the typical regalia with, the jackets and the badges and hats and all that kind of thing. I think you might see some detectives in downtown Dallas, but God knows I'd never look for them, and hopefully I've not done anything to warrant them looking at me.
Do policemen have the right to carry their own arm, or do they have to have their issue? Is Texas a state where you can have bring your own gun to work, so to speak, or do they have the standard 9mm or?
Well, as far as cops go, I don't know about that. I don't know what their issue is. Unfortunately, and I'm not trying to get political, I'm not a big fan of the carry the gun around kind of thing. But in Texas, there are citizens that get to carry their guns around, and that obviously makes a lot of us very nervous.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they don't get 44 Magnums.
God help me, no.
This is a great location, Jordan.
Yeah.
I mean, probably, I wouldn't say it's the first movie to have classic noir movies end in these sort of locations at factories or abandoned mills and stuff. And
Yeah, but it's a nice callback to that, because I guess with a lot of cop shows that happen back then, a lot of it was always just on a street, and a lot of the action that happens in this movie is we've got a bit of a shootout in an abandoned park, but a lot of it is just in streets in whatever city they happen to be filming in at the time. So I guess this is a bit more secluded, so there's a little less of the law and public opinion in this scene, and a lot more of just two guys having a gunfight. It sort of takes away all the stuff that this movie has been talking about in terms of the pressures of society and what should be done right and wrong here. And it's far more just about who's going to come out on top in this situation, which I guess I really like. It sort of, it becomes an allegory to seclude them from the politics in the film that's talked about prior to this moment.
To anyone in the room with me now, do you think Sovereign Hill when you think of this movie?
A little bit.
A little bit.
I mean, it would be very different if instead of this, they were dressed in like 18th century clothing and,
Panning for gold.
you know, learning to say the alphabet backwards. But
I was thinking more of like three-pin bowling rather than a gravel conveyor belt. If there was like a, you know, like in There Will Be Blood or something.
Is that what it is? It's a gravel quarry?
I think they're processing gravel or stone from... Previous guest Daniel was saying this part of the Marin County or whatever has a lot of asbestos serpentine rock that they used to make asbestos out of, which adds another lane.
so it doesn't matter what happens, both of these characters are going to die.
Are gonna die.
Yeah, it's going to go real badly for them.
Yeah.
Now, Todd, if they remade this particular movie now, do you think they'd be tempted to somehow have Chico enter the frame and come help Harry?
You know, that is honestly. So we talk about the eras of 70s cinema when people were taking chances, especially 71. The problem with American cinema now is it is so formulaic that by all means they would, and this would become a buddy movie. Harry would have none of that kind of that feel of the guy that was technically doing almost what was wrong to some extent. And, you know, yeah, they would, God help us if they ever remake this movie, because they will just absolutely screw it up.
Oh, they definitely will. That's happening in the next 5 years. Reboot, absolutely. It'll be like Keanu Reeves and it'll be Dirty Harry, except it'll be a black suit and a gun, and it'll just be him calling people breathtaking and then probably shooting them. Actually, now I kind of want to see it. I don't know, I've talked myself into this.
What made me think of that, Todd, was in your recent episodes of Escape from the Planet of the Apes, you talk about the third apenaut, what was it called? Milo. How Milo's killed off really early. And in a way, in 70s filmmaking, sometimes they have these things just happen really quickly, and you think, hey, no, you could have developed that character more, or it could have served as a harbinger for something later on in the script. And so that's what made me think about Chico's use in this movie. He's gone, you know?
Yeah, that's a good correlation, because these also came out the same year. And so you're looking at somebody like Siegel, who is a really well-versed filmmaker, who at least has the discretion not to do those kind of things. But man, yeah, you're absolutely right with Escape. That's been one thing that I think we will probably beat to a pulp of why does cinema of that era feel the need to introduce a character who's full of knowledge and then just go and get rid of them. So that's a good question.
Chico is one of, by consensus, previous guests, Chico is a lot of our favourite character.
Yeah.
We wanted to see more about him, but he's gone.
I'm afraid though, if you add him in, that you would end up with it being Lethal Weapon, and God knows we don't need any more Lethal Weapon.
That's right. And of course, the cinematographer Bruce Surtees of Dirty Harry later goes on to photograph the next one, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. So look forward to his great cinematography there in Darkness. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I saw that today and I thought, you know, some of my favorite cinematography in the entire Apes series comes in Conquest. And forgive me, because the names come so quick and it's like one of my stomach blocks. Is it Maggie who's not seen this film up until now?
No, it's Mandy. Mandy.
That's the disadvantage of hearing over a headphone. But so one of my guys that I host it with, Sean, has never seen any of the Planet of the Apes. And,
wow,
you know, I get the thrill of kind of talking to him about these kind of things. So I can't imagine, in a way, almost not having seen this movie. Apes films are easy to step into and never see them before. But Dirty Harry, this had to be kind of a wild trip to watch this for the first time with other people dissecting it minute by minute.
Yeah, it really was. It was terrifying, because I had never done a podcast before, A, and B, I had no idea what I was talking about. So yeah, it was tricky, but then it kind of gives you the opportunity to just look at it in isolation and maybe pick up some things that maybe you wouldn't otherwise.
Absolutely. I totally see that. I mean, that's the crazy thing doing these minute by minute. And I think that those of us who've done it have that unique perspective of it's almost to the point that you break down such minutia that you're even beyond what the film is about and you start seeing things and possibilities. So I just applaud you for doing it in that same way.
Sometimes it's difficult, Todd, like the earlier scenes in the movie, the Peeping Tom scenes, right? We sort of feel we're talking 25 minutes about this voyeurism. Are we complicit? Are we applauding this, reviewing it, trying to find excuses for what Harry's doing? And sometimes it's quite tough. Yeah.
And you're giving equal weight to that minute.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the novelisation, you've got... This all transpires in just a few pages, but you have Scorpio at several times like going, "Hey, you missed me, pig! Get me, copper!" and just interacting with Harry. Would you have liked to have seen that in this part, Jordan?
I don't think I would have. I think if you have time in these kind of moments to stop and think of a quip to shout out, you're probably not putting enough effort into running for your life.
But Tourette's like just go, like he does later in the movie.
Yeah, to an extent. I think it would have taken away from this scene. I think one of the great things about the scene is if you get really sucked into it, you honestly don't know who's going to come out of this on top. Like, I mean, to an extent, you know, in the film, your hero is probably going to win, but in moments like this, you don't know which one's going to get winged or shot in the arm or shot in the leg, and there's a certain amount of tension in that, but that would be taken away if you felt like both of them had time to sort of grunt or talk or react. I think it's adrenaline in this scene. It's sheer determination from Harry, and it's sheer almost fear from Scorpio, I think. And yeah, I guess if you put too much thought into not into their characters, but if you give their characters too much time to think in these scenes, then that momentum gets sort of
broken,
slown. Yeah.
Totally agree. And not knowing the length of the movie, I was wondering, is he going to slip away and we're not going to catch the bad guy again? This is going to be another... so I had that kind of feeling about it just watching it recently.
Oh, imagine if he gets away and then you're like, cool, now there's another 20 minutes of another inspector telling Harry that he shouldn't be shooting without permission, and then he goes to another abandoned field and kicks him in the leg or something.
Yeah, and if it was made today, there'd be another hour to go in the film.
And it'd just be another abandoned warehouse, or like the end of Terminator 2, like that molten magma like mill. It'd just be another one of those.
Lowering Scorpion down.
Scorpio down. Some lava.
Now, Clint apparently remembered this location and this quarry from his childhood when he used to catch the ferry across the bay with his parents. Can anyone remember good locations from their childhood that they're adamant should be in a movie?
Oh, I mean, I grew up in the country, so I mean, everything looks like a Western. I helped a mate out just a week ago with one of their student films where I was...
a hard-nosed cop?
No, I was actually like an abusive husband, but it was a Western, and we shot it just at one of our mates' like place because he had 20 acres and he had this beautiful old like gum tree and all the leaves had pretty much died on it, and just my mate, he's in our podcast, Brody, he's one of the co-hosts, but he's just got a really good eye for cinematography, and he'd set it up so that it looked like this wide open plain with one tree, and just everywhere I grew up looks like something like that. This is really, really cool.
Nice.
I was just thinking of Bell Street Macca's down the road.
Why?
No, I was just thinking about it.
After this, we should all just go grab some.
No, that sounds beautiful, all those locations, country locations, and then it'll be Australiana, so it'll be with the gum trees, so you could weave that into it.
Well, I mean, I live on a street called Honor Avenue, and if you Google Macedon Honor Avenue, it's actually a tourist location during autumn, because you basically have what ends up being a tunnel of just this bright orange and red trees.
All right.
It looks beautiful. I don't know what type of film you'd shoot there. Maybe even like a samurai type film. Be pretty cool though.
I also live in an area that's a international tourist location because they shoot Neighbours in Vermont, where I'm from. So it's not really called Ramsay Street. Well, you wouldn't know it because they always have the street signs stolen. But that's my claim to fame. Yeah.
Now, Todd, not to bore you, but I've got another quote from the novelisation.
Okay.
This is Harry in the novelization, speaking, I think, to Chico's wife. We had beat cops when I was a kid. When I was 6 years old, I threw a brick at one of them. He picked it up and threw it right back. They didn't teach cops sociology in those days. I don't know. Maybe we were all better off. I just don't know.
Is that legitimately a quote?
Yeah.
Wow.
Todd, do you think cops should be taught sociology? Do you think cops should be taught sociology? I mean, I'm sure they are.
Well, it's funny. Look, I'm not trying to get too personal, but the weird thing is I got a teenager who's about to go up to college, and what she wants to study is forensic psychology. My dad, again, was a psychologist, and my kid comes by a knowledge study. So I think, if anything, cops probably need that. And I don't know if you guys have ventured into the wonderful show on Netflix called Mindhunter about the people who learn to break down serial killer behavior that they now teach to cops. I think Harry could use a little more sociology.
I think Harry could use a lot more of pretty much any kind of form of communication and understanding of other people's psychology. He seems consistently dazed.
I mean, this was a time when the public weren't really aware of serial killers, were they? I mean, sociopathy or whatever it's called was understood, the violent criminal, the hood, in the noir sense, but psychopathy, where murder is the motive, pure and simple, was pretty much unknown to the public at large, wasn't it?
Although Harry knows he will kill again because he enjoys it.
Yeah, Harry has some nascent understanding of this new type of criminal, well, at least he can condense it to patterns. There are patterns of behaviour that people are addicted to.
Yeah, he'll go far.
He'll go far. But of course, Todd, in your series, it's not until the last movie that the apes are even aware that ape cannot kill ape, that ape can kill ape, that it's a possible thing. But the idea back then that you could kill for fun.
Yeah, I don't know in America if that idea had permeated enough out to be part of cinema. To your point, I don't know exactly when we started looking at serial killers like, Scorpio / Zodiac, that what do they do? Why do they do it? How do they do, etc. So I don't think they were ready to even confront it. And I do think the Apes movies, what they do a pretty good job is a couple years after something becomes prevalent in the American culture of what we're talking about politically, socially, they begin to reflect it there. But you're absolutely right. When it gets to the final film in that original series, that's when they really start hounding home that idea of not killing each other. Man, now that's all of a sudden, now you've opened a door of things I got to think about when we get there too. So.
Yeah. Well, Todd, the big question we always ask our guests, and we hate asking it, but we have to, is this a fascist film, as Pauline Kael said, or is it irresponsibly giving the green light to vigilantism? Or is it just a story of, hey, this could happen? How do you deal with this? Is it a fascist film?
So, I was raised by a man who loved cinema, and one of the first books he gave me was a book of Pauline Kael's reviews, and I kind of agree with her a bit, but I also find her undyingly pretentious. So I would love to say it's a bit of escapism, but I do, unfortunately, especially here in America, people get this kind of stuff and they start thinking that it's, a calling card to them to go out and do what they want. And it's the wonderful thing about living in a quote unquote free society with a democracy where you can be who you want to be within the social laws. I worry about films like this. But at the same time, I don't think it's the responsibility of the filmmaker to necessarily say this is the way you have to live. They get to say what they want to say, and I think that oftentimes something like this is a reflection upon their views and how they feel that society is existing right now. They don't have any other way than to send a cop out there who has no limits and to blow people away. So the problem is I think for American cinema, especially that next about 10 to 15 years, all we got were cops that were going to blow people away, and it's so tiresome.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it shouldn't be the responsibility of a filmmaker to have to think about whether their film is dictating to the public how to act, because once you start doing that, then every movie is dictated by social political correctness. And at that point, there's not much point making a movie, because you can only make a movie about what people are already doing or thinking.
Yeah.
And therefore, what's the point of seeing a film?
Yeah. I think this film is very open. Like it shows you the tension of following the rules, and it shows you the shortcomings of breaking the rules. So I think they handle with that topic really gracefully, and it's quite balanced. And I don't find it preachy one way or the other.
Do you think the silent majority in the late 60s, you know, suburban mums and dads going to this movie would be like, yeah, you know, there's too many rights for criminals, and who's going to stand up for the little guy?
I think this movie paints perspective. I think it's a movie, like, when you do a movie like this, its job is in the same way as a comedian, it forces you to have an idea. It gives you one side of an argument or one side of a perspective so it can tell a story the way it wants to tell it. So you can watch this movie and be like, yeah, criminals do have too many rights, because when you watch this movie, that's what it depicts. But it's also avoiding showing the other side of that coin on
Well,
purpose.
let's not use the shorthand criminals. Let's say suspected criminals.
Sure,
That's the whole
suspected
point. Yeah.
people that may or may not have done suspicious activities. But this movie is painted to depict the bad guys getting away with too much so that Dirty Harry has an excuse to go outside the law, and so that we have an excuse to watch a good action film.
Well, this is definitely Harry's movie, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But watching it minute by minute, I'm more interested in the Scorpio bit.
Yeah, a hero's only as good as its villain.
Yeah.
True.
Fun fact, Clint Eastwood was on the re-elect Nixon committee in 71 or 2 when this movie came out. You know?
Wow.
Creep or whatever it was called. Yeah. Anyway, I just found that out.
He was on the re-elect committee.
Just a part of the celebrities, you know, trying to raise fundraising for Nixon's second term.
In what year?
72 or what? That's more of a Todd question, I think. The 72, the Watergate, just before Watergate, trying to get...
Yeah, so what could he do? Write an article for the newspaper? Or
Probably just spoke at a few events or spoke
Oh.
to a few chairs.
He just threatened to shoot people if they didn't. It was just Dirty Harrying about.
Because now you'd be on a viral video, but I guess that didn't really apply.
Todd, have you seen J. Edgar?
No, I never saw that, actually.
You're not missing a lot. It's basically a glorified TV movie that's got Leo DiCaprio in it. And,
Right.
I mean, as foreigners, we know vaguely the rumours about J. Edgar being a narcissist, about being a control freak and threatening, blackmailing politicians and just being a crusading sort of anti-communist in the FBI. But there's some parallels with this movie because, I've written them down, it was a time in America when J. Edgar was forming the FBI, that America was fearing the Bolshevik threat of the early 1910s. Obviously, we have now compare that to Dirty Harry of the 60s, the permissiveness. Hoover had to, when the FBI was being formed, they had no legal rights. They had no legal rights to own guns. They weren't they didn't have jurisdiction over kidnapping. They didn't really have any rights. And so there's that scene where Leo DiCaprio is giving them the guns, like, you know, you're not allowed to have these because we're not a registered force, so to speak. And Hoover is like Harry. He's obsessed with deviance. You know, he says, I should have 10,000 names by the end of the month. And, you know, he sort of knows all the hot Marys and he's obsessed with, you know, old-fashioned values that Harry is. So I thought it was a little bit of a companion piece to Dirty Harry. Yeah. But I wouldn't rush to check it out.
If I ever see it on HBO here late one night, maybe I'll subject myself to it. But then again, it doesn't sound like I probably would want to do that.
Is that modern? Like, what year was that?
I think it's 2011 or something.
All the best films came out in 2011.
Can't think of one.
It's like 4 reboots of RoboCop. That's all we got.
Here's another quote, guys. The first 3 Dirty Harry movies offer a tour down a scuzzy side street of mainstream 70s cinema. With their helicopter shots, no second take performances, and light jazz soundtracks, they were the kind of movies that seemed to define the decade as a low point in Hollywood. What do you think, Jordan?
I disagree. I think it actually defines it as a point in Hollywood where they were starting to take some more risks. The fact that they didn't do second takes makes the films feel a lot more raw, and it also makes it feel gritty. And I think for this type of film, you need that element of grit. Like an audience can tell, they don't necessarily can identify exactly what it is, but you can see a film like this and know that there's an element of grit and an element of rawness when they filmed it, and that comes across when you watch it and adds to the performances. So I don't think it was a low point at all. I think I'd love more films like this, more films that are a bit rough around the edges.
You like this movie, Shane?
Yep. Yeah, I don't think there's any like boring parts to it. It all like moves pretty quickly. You get to see a lot of locations end to end, and it makes sense. Like it all fits together quite well. It doesn't really matter that we don't get much of the backstory of the two main characters. You follow them and you get invested in it. It works well. I like it. It stands up.
Todd, are you happy with the amount of backstory such as it is we get from Scorpio?
Was I happy with it? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Is it good enough? In fact, it doesn't exist. His backstory. Are you happy with that?
I hate to say it that I kept going back to the wonderful David Fincher film of Zodiac, and I kept thinking there's so much there that I almost felt like I was plugging in for it. So that should be the answer in and of itself. No, there's nothing. It's, I watch villains like that, and especially at the end where they're just sneering, and when he grabs I know I'm jumping ahead in your minutes, and if Richard from my show were here, this is when he'd be screaming at me that I'm jumping ahead. But guess what? I don't get to talk about the future minutes, so I'm going to talk about him anyway.
Do it.
When Scorpio grabs the kid later on, I'm like, hey, why does it have to be a sneering, sniveling moment? There's no pathos to this villain other than craze, and I don't want to knock the movie, but I found that kind of boring. It's not menacing. It's not terrifying.
Yeah, I think if you gave too much backstory to this character, I think it'd take some of what makes it scary out of it. I think the good thing about not having a backstory for him is it does make you think that anyone at any point in time could just be a psycho like this. Sometimes movies go a little too heavy to be like, well, he was an orphan, and then he was like beaten as a kid, and then he lost his job, and you have all of these really like consistent bad things that happen to them to make him this way. And it makes it feel far more unlikely that anyone could snap like that. Like you have to have a really particular set of like background happenings to get here. Whereas by not knowing what happened, there's an element of thinking that this guy just snapped one day. And I do kind of like that. But at the same time, I think since this movie, I can't speak too much about before this film because I don't say I know a lot about cinema in the 70s, but at least since this film, we had so many generic bad guys that were just evil for the sake of being evil, and I think it's important now, less so then, but far more important now that we do have some reasoning for that so that we care at all. Because if you give zero background to the bad guy, then you just know they're going to lose, because why would they win?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mind not knowing the background, and I feel like I used to watch movies wanting the backstory to make sense. Oh yeah, like Norman Bates, sort of so weird relationship with his mother. Okay, that kind of squares the circle for me, and I can rationalize why they act so crazy. And I think now I don't really want that because I think it's more realistic that people act crazy. They just act crazy, and trying to put a nice, neat narrative behind it. Yeah, I think a bit of what you were just saying, Jordan, it just seems a bit contrived, a bit too lumped on later, and like that post hoc rationalization. But that's not the way life works. Sometimes it's just crazy happens for crazy reasons, and it's not like a nice straight line from one to the other. Yeah, sane to insane or something like that.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is that a lot of this movie is from Harry's perspective. And I guess in this scenario, Harry doesn't know.
He doesn't know, yeah.
And a lot of times in things like this, like you don't, like backstories for bad guys, and it's like in real life. Yes. That stuff doesn't come out until the court hearings, until there is debates as to whether you can justify his actions or not. And at that point, that's when the backstory sort of will come out in real life. And so at this point in time, Harry doesn't need to know his backstory. He knows he's doing the wrong thing. His job is to catch him. The problem with this film is he's not planning on catching him.
Well, there's just enough hints as well that you can make your own backstory for this character. And I found myself thinking gun nut, because they mentioned that. And he does use different, he uses different guns, like his sniping rifle and then his automatic weapon or whatever. So I'm like, yeah, okay, gun nut, that sort of makes sense. And ex-military, John, you've thought perhaps,
maybe if he was ex-military, he'd be he would have shot Harry when Harry jumps onto the conveyor belt, or he'd have a bit more, rather than just run away, he'd be a bit more strategic.
Oh, we don't need a scene where, we've done his background check and he's been analysed and he's had some post-traumatic stress disorder in his past and he's gone off his medication and who cares?
And the government's cancelled the subsidy.
Well, the other thing is when you go down that path, I think a lot of movies are making this mistake. And very recently on my podcast, we just reviewed a movie called The Joker. And a point that we didn't bring up in our podcast, but we had a discussion about afterwards, was a lot of films that put too much emphasis on people having psychological disorders is it makes the audience, and it makes people genuinely think that if you have any kind of psychological disorder, you're more likely to be aggressive. And it actually really poorly paints people that have social disorders. I think if you have too many movies, it's like, yeah, well, they're bad because they have trauma in their past, or they're bad because they have a social disorder. And if you're one of those people that have a social disorder and you're trying to overcome those things, and every movie is painting you as a bad guy, it's like in those 80s flicks where every bad guy was like German. Imagine being a German during those times where...
Or English, sort of Jeremy Irons.
Yeah, it's like every film, you're just the bad guy because...
Yeah,
and I think if you're just like, well, he's bad because he has social trauma, it's like, well, it's kind of a dick thing to just put it all on that.
Mandy, do you think Harry's on the spectrum himself?
Gosh, I'm not well.
I'm not a doctor.
I don't know. But it's very common these days, as you're saying, Jordan, to sort of say, well, they're on the spectrum. I mean, look at Greta Thunberg, for example, right now. You know, the fact that she's, Aspie means that she shouldn't be taken seriously. I don't know. He might be, but does it matter?
No, it doesn't. I just want to know if his spiel about 6 shots are only 5, if that's part of his sort of a Tourette's response to
That's
all the
interesting,
criminals in
yeah.
his life. Well, Todd, I like in this minute, Todd, how it's in beautiful sunny daylight. You know, growing up on 80s films, Die Hard and everything, you're taught, all action films have to end at night, preferably with water on the ground and the asphalt. And do you think it's taking place at high noon, sort of as a nod to the Western, or... I'm really impressed that it takes place at daylight, aren't you?
You know, that's an interesting idea. I can't, without having the budget in front of me, I can't help but wonder if it isn't simply because, what was the budget of the film? Were they trying to make for maximum exposure and they're not trying to bring in lights and therefore production costs are brought down? Did they think through to do it at high noon? I don't know. But, you think about what Clint Eastwood did with Sergio Leone, the guy, he understood and is an influence to bring it in, how to do things on the cheap and get them done. So I don't know. That's an interesting thought. I would have really alluded more again towards the cutting of budget than I would have high noon, but I kind of like the idea now of truly making it a Western type thing.
I thought it was like a bookend to the brightness of where we start at the film. And then a lot of the midsection of the movie is dark at night. What's going on? Could we even see this if we were watching this on a small screen?
Most of the film is pitch black dark or bright Californian sun. All of it, except for the one scene in the middle where the Marianne Deacon's body's taken out, where it's at dawn, sort of halfway between, that's where the really... reflective time is. The only reflective time in this music for like 2 seconds because Clint Eastwood can't emote, so they just shoot him from behind at dawn. Well, that's pretty much all I have for this minute, guys. Does anything else stand out to you? Jordan, I love the wood. I love the corrugated iron. It makes me think of the bush. Yeah.
I want to circle back to the point about people having mental disorders, and that explains why they're the criminal or the bad element of the film. And I think audiences today find that they know people with diagnoses, and so it has a backfire effect where you're like, okay, this Scorpio fellow may have PTSD, maybe my uncle does as well, and therefore it doesn't work as an explanatory device because it just backfires. We know it's not connected with violence in all cases, so just to tie back to that, I think that's a good point Jordan made before.
Yeah. Well, Todd, many thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I mean, it's so cool to get out and talk to other people doing this. And I didn't even know you guys were in Australia when you first approached. So the fact that now I can go to Richard and Sean and go, you know what, guys, suck it. I've worked with a group out of Australia. So pretty damn cool.
International.
Well, thank you very much, Todd. Hopefully it wasn't too painful. You enjoyed the movie legitimately? Like it was fun? It was you liked it?
Well, again, yeah. I mean, I watched it in film school, and it's it's one of those that we watched and we broke down. Why does it work? What does it do? You learn a lot from it. So watching it again was kind of a throwback to the 90s of being in school, and it was fun. I hadn't watched it just to watch it in a long time, so yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I read the other day, Todd, that Frank Miller originally, the whole reason behind Sin City, is this right, was that he was disappointed how the series had ended, the Deadpool. So in a way, yeah, the whole Sin City graphic novel was sort of a recompense for that. Do you know anything about that?
No, I'd never heard that before, but I Frank Miller is probably one of my favorites that ever did anything like that. And if you guys know it, one of the guys that I co-host Minute of the Apes with actually owns a comic book store where we record all the stuff. So trust me, that's shoved down my throat. And now I'm going to have to go back to him and ask him if he's ever heard that before.
Yeah, it could be a tenuous link, but I think the obvious truth is that there's a girl called Nancy Callahan in it. Is that right? We'll have to get Richard
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
That's interesting. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, and then Don Post, director of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, goes on to direct Magnum Force later in this
Yeah.
series. So I found quite a few connections across the board.
Yeah, I had that ticks my mind now. I'd forgotten about that. One thing both movies share is credits in the 70s. The unions must not have had such a control. It's so weird. There's so few many names. And I mean, famously in Planet of the Apes, some of the judges are above, and who appear, for 1 or 2 minutes, are above the other, astronauts and stuff. It's weird how the
Right.
things are rated here, yeah.
Well, that's a whole, that's a podcast we can do another time because I actually took the business of film in school, and you want to talk about the weirdness of American cinema when those things broke, and we don't do that anymore. So you're absolutely right. This is dipping into a bygone era of the way they did credits in America.
Yeah. I assumed back then unions had more power, so there'd be more credits and less now, but it's the reverse. Anyway, thanks for joining us, Shane.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Jordan.
You're welcome.
And Mandy, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll catch you next time on
Dirty Harry
Minutes.
Right another wrong, but hey, what's the point? A new man may clap as he lights another joint. I can barely now remember my wife. My police work is all I got. I don't have a life. Harry's had enough. Harry's had enough. Harry's had enough. Harry's had enough. What should my priorities be? Hang the magnum up, reading my rights. I just don't give a fuck. Wanna get under the hood skin. Miranda rights, never gonna get that going. Harry's had enough. Harry's had enough. Harry's had enough. Harry's had enough. Helicopter shots and magnum fights. Lot of darkness, voyeuristic action goes down at night. Gratuitous nudes, me too prudes. Laughing that hot dogs are my only food. Can't be fucked setting up all the equipment 40 years on. Hey, I just want something different. Word.